Welcome to the College Football Show, the 440 Sports College Football Show. Jared Stillman, Braden Gall, our new-ish. Do we call it a new show, Braden? A new college football show?
Well, you and I have known each other. For those that don't on this feed, don't know the voice of Jared Stillman. You and I have known each other for a very, very long time. We have worked together for many, many years. And now that the band is back together, we've always wanted to talk about college football. I don't know how formal and finalized our schedule will be. But at this time of year, it's fun to talk about college football. I know a lot of you out there on this feed have been kind of waiting to kind of see what's going to happen. And again, we are still working to finalize stuff, but too much drama this past week. You got the playoff rankings, you got coaching carousel that's completely insane. We have the best job maybe in the entire sport outside of LSU still available, which is wild. And so I thought, you know what, let's just get started and see how this goes and see what people think of us.
So I say let's get right into it. Let's get right on the coaching carousel. You brought up LSU. That job has been filled. Ole Miss has been filled. Kentucky has been filled. Florida has been filled. Pretty much every important job, every big job across the country has been filled, except the one big job that I think came open first. I mean, I can't remember, the firings and the days and everything else, but I think Penn State was the first big domino to fall. They fired James Franklin after that incredibly rough stretch where they lost to Northwestern and they lost to UCLA. And it was like, he's got to go. And so Franklin goes. They were willing to pay him $50 million. Now he took the Virginia Tech job. So they got, I think, a get out of jail free card in that regard. And yet everybody that they have wanted to hire has said no. Curt Cignetti signs an extension at Indiana. He says no. Everybody else after that has said no. Kalani Sitake this week, BYU, said no. Jeff Brom at Louisville, an 8-4 coach who may be having back-to-back appearances in the Tony the Tiger Sun Bowl, said no. So, what's going on at Penn State post James Franklin? And do you think that Pat Kraft regrets the decision to fire James Franklin, knowing that this has turned into what looks at this point to be really, really bad?
I still think there are a couple of really good candidates that could end up making this worth the move. I think Franklin landing at Virginia Tech, to your point, makes the whole thing explainable and palatable to the alumni base and to the people that they're asking money for. But I think we've reached the point of we've reached the portion of the coaching search and the list where you are now below James Franklin. There's no question about that. This is sort of like the Arkansas Memphis thing. Mm-hmm. Like if everyone on the fan, like if you hire a coach and every fan from the previous fan base is excited that you hired their guy from them, like Arkansas took Ryan Silverfield from Memphis and Memphis fans were like, great. Virginia Tech fans are ecstatic that they have James Franklin. They are high on their own supply right now, which is they should be. It's a huge coup because while he may not be able to win a championship, he has a high floor, a very high floor at Vanderbilt and Penn State, proven over 15 years of coaching. Nobody that they're going to get is going to come close to that. Is Manny Diaz going to be better than James Franklin? Percentages and likelihood says no. Is Brian Daboll going to be better than James Franklin? There's a chance he's good, but I don't know if he's better than James Franklin. So I think time will I think a lot of it depends on Jared, 2 years from now. If it's clear that they made a mistake on who they hired, then you have to say that it's a huge regrettable decision to move on. I think clearly an emotional one around some of the losses that they had this year. Clearly, here's the other thing I wanted to add, and I wanted to see what you thought about this. I don't know how we do a psychological study of locker rooms of highly ranked teams that start to struggle in the modern playoff era. But Texas, Clemson, and Penn State were what I thought on this show, when last time when I were doing the show in the summertime, were the three best rosters in America. That could not have been more wrong. But I think there's something that happens in a college football locker room these days with a bunch of young people where all of a sudden it's clear they're not going to realize all the press clippings and the expectations from the summer and what happens to that locker room psychologically. I think it's going to be really interesting to study across the country in this sport because I think clearly Penn State and Clemson, they're not that bad. They're not as bad as their records are. I think something happened. Texas figured out a way to stem it, right? They stemmed the tide a little bit and they didn't kind of fall off the track. So I'm fascinated by that. I think Penn State would be a certain level of good with James Franklin. We know that. And the names that they are now looking at, now that Jeff Brom has said no and all the extensions you mentioned, like I don't know why Jeff Brom wasn't a top 3 to 5 candidate the second they fired James Franklin. It seems like they slow played him, and now people aren't as interested in the job. And I don't know what's happening in the water in Happy Valley right now, honestly.
So I think my big thing with Penn State is what I heard from an industry source was that Pat Kraft and James Franklin have kind of the same personality. And if you know those guys at all, you know it's my way or the highway with that type of personality. Nothing is ever good enough. I have been dealt this terrible hand. I am doing the best I can do. You are failing me. And so when you have two guys that are looking at one another and saying, you are failing me, no, you are failing me, that's ultimately not going to work. And so I believe that Pat Kraft saw the opportunity after the Northwestern game to fire James Franklin, and he did. The problem is if you're going to fire James Franklin, who was successful at Penn State, granted, he could never win any big games. Got it. But if you're going to fire James Franklin, you have to know who you are going to hire next. And you have to feel confident in that hire. And clearly they didn't know who they were going to hire next. They just assumed, well, we're Penn State. And because we're Penn State, our brand will give us coach 1, 2, or 3. The problem is they're now past, 6, 7, 8. And they're looking at all these other coaches. And I mean, you brought up Jeff Brom. Again, I love Jeff Brom. Jeff Brom's been at Louisville for 3 years. He's been in the Holiday Bowl. He's been in the Sun Bowl. And this year, it's probably going to be the Duke's Mayo Bowl at 8-4. Like, is that better than James Franklin? I don't think it is. And they can't even get him. So at this point, I think if you're Penn State, you have to find the best coordinator you can find. You have to hire them to be head coach. And yet, Will Stein's off the board. Brian Hartline's off the board. I guess they didn't want either guy. They interviewed them both, and they don't want either guy, so they're off the board. So I don't know where Penn State goes from here, but the problem is no matter who Penn State hires, it's going to be a press conference of Pat Kraft saying, trust me, this guy is going to work. And maybe it does, because there's no way to know in these coaching cycles if it's going to work or not work, but it's not going to inspire the confidence that I think both Penn State and their fans thought they were going to have the day that they fired James Franklin.
I mean, right now, Bob Chesney at UCLA and Pat Fitzgerald at Michigan State are better hires than fill in the blank at Penn State.
Why didn't Penn State want Bob Chesney?
It's a great question. Now, I understand that's a harder sell, right? Smaller school guy. Now, like we're Penn State. We don't have to do the Indiana thing. Like Indiana caught this lightning in a bottle, but don't tell me that like they knew this was going to happen. Like Curt Cignetti's a great coach. Just Google him. I got it. Like he's awesome. But like no, if anybody in college football knew that that's what Curt Cignetti was going to be able to do at a place like Indiana, he would have been hired 56 times across the country, and he wasn't by anybody. Indiana did it. So you do have to have like there's a risk element there to taking a coach like that. UCLA can afford to take the risk right now because they're in such a weird situation, and it's still a prestigious university and a great place for talent with a historically awesome venue. They just have it's so much other weird stuff with their financing and the stadium being off campus and all the stuff we've talked about with UCLA for years that kind of hold it back. You can afford to take a risk on a Bob Chesney. And I don't even know if that's that big of a risk at a place like UCLA. Pat Fitzgerald is a totally proven commodity. Don't tell me Pat Fitzgerald wouldn't do good things at Penn State. Like if you're okay, like who cares about the stuff that like just take away the off the field stuff and kind of remove it from the equation. Like he's an excellent football coach. Do they need to be patient with him? Probably. Maybe Penn State wasn't willing to be patient. Maybe that's why they weren't interested in a guy like Pat Fitzgerald. It's hard not to think that something is there, because here's what's interesting about all this, Jared, that I don't think that I've talked about on this show before, which is the agent game is changing. It is more than just Jimmy Sexton and CAA. All those names that have extensions that you named, they all have extensions through agencies of other agencies. And they do business differently than CAA and Jimmy Sexton. Mm-hmm. There's a reason that that Curt Cignetti had an extension like 18 hours after James Franklin was fired. I think they thought, to your point about the next guy, and this is what's interesting with LSU to me. LSU was all in on Kiffin from the word go. They raised the money to fire Brian Kelly to give that money to Lane Kiffin. That was their plan all along. And even up until the last weekend, there was still a chance Lane Kiffin wasn't going to go to LSU. There were lots of reports about his interest in the NFL, his interest in staying at Ole Miss. I think I was told by multiple people that he was truly conflicted the entire week of Thanksgiving, that he didn't know what he wanted to do until he finally made a decision with his family. But that his family was the key, and that he was very frustrated with how Ole Miss was handling everything. But LSU didn't have a backup plan necessarily. Like, sure, they could have gone after Jon Sumrall. Lincoln Riley was not leaving. So it felt kind of like maybe Matt Rule was that guy for Penn State. Maybe. Like, hey, former Penn State linebacker, doing a pretty good job. But, like, he's not Lane Kiffin. Like, you have to have a second and third and fourth plan because Matt Rule is not Lane Kiffin. Going all in for Nick Saban or Lane Kiffin or whoever is one strategy because you know that guy's going to deliver. There's no guarantee Matt Rule would have been great at Penn State. I think it would have been a good hire, but I don't think you win. Like, we're not all falling over backwards to tell Penn State how great a job they did if they go from James Franklin to Matt Rule.
I don't think Matt Rule's that good of a coach.
I think he's fine. Yeah, I think he's fine. But, like, Auburn, like, I know I'm kind of bouncing around here, but, like, Auburn had a backup plan immediately ready to go. It was going to hire Jon Sumrall. I think Auburn forced Jon Sumrall to do things he didn't want to do, which is take this coordinator, take this coaching staff member, Auburn was forcing things on Jon Sumrall, and Jon Sumrall was like, nah, I'm good. Like, he was going to be the coach at Auburn. Mm-hmm. And when Florida came along and said, here are the keys to the car, he went to Florida. Auburn had a second option. They immediately pivoted. Now, do I think Alex Golish might be in over his skis a little bit? And do I think it is absolutely delicious that a Russian immigrant is the head coach at Auburn? Absolutely. I think that is delicious. But they had a plan immediately set and ready to go for when Sumrall left. Boom. Like, they had been spending days and days and days with Sumrall getting down the line on all the things that you need to get down the line on. Contracts and NIL and assistants and, all these other things. And they got pretty far on that, and they still were able to pivot quickly to another relatively solid option.
Do you buy any of these? Pat Kraft has a trick up his sleeve. Kalen DeBoer, if they lose in the SEC championship game, will be the next head coach at Penn State.
I think Kalen DeBoer would, like, if Auburn wins that game, do you think Kalen DeBoer is more interested in Penn State? I bet you he is. You know what I'm saying?
Sure.
Like if Auburn wins that, you cannot. It's hard. It's a hard existence, and I know these guys sign up for this stuff, and my bleeding heart doesn't go out to the coaches. It's a hard existence. And Ryan Day has been through this at Ohio State. Like, it's a tricky way to live, man, when you are every single year your team is good enough to make the playoffs and you're doing a good enough job at what you're supposed to do that you're building a playoff caliber team almost every single year, if not every year, and the whole entire evaluation of whether or not you're good or not by your fan base comes down to the last game of the season. Like, that's just a tough way to live. At least James Franklin lost to Ohio State in the middle of the year all those years, So I don't know. Like, I think it's not a crazy idea if I'm Kalen DeBoer to go to Penn State. I don't think that's crazy. I don't think a guy like Josh Heupel, for example, is interested. I heard his name floated, getting out ahead of the pitchforks and the torches kind of thing. But, like, again, if Tennessee fans are upset with Josh Heupel, they need to get over themselves. I understand at least Alabama fans maybe being frustrated with, 5 losses in 2 years or whatever, but that's also an insane expectation. So I don't know. I could say, wouldn't that be juicy though? Alabama loses coach to Penn State. That would be fantastic.
That would be wild. And then it would set a whole nother chain reaction off because all the coaches that signed extensions, now that would all be on the table for everybody trying to get the Alabama job.
Well, who said no to Bama last time when they hired DeBoer? Dan Lanning. Dan Lanning was higher on their list. And so I'd be curious if he now would be interested in a job like that. And so Lanning is like this whale that everybody wants. And I don't know.
The other problem too is Oregon has lost all their backup options because Will Stein has gone to Kentucky.
Dillingham. Yeah.
And Dillingham is at Arizona State. And I think Tosh Lupoy is going to be at Cal, right?
I would assume. I don't love that, but I would assume. They're so big on, like, front office Cal is, which is really interesting, actually.
And I know his record wasn't great. I actually thought Justin Wilcox is a pretty good coach. That's just me.
I think he'd be a really good defensive coordinator at, like, I don't know where he would be, like Texas or something, I'm
just going to tell you, I sat there in the athletic director's box at the Louisville Cal game a month ago, and I watched Justin Wilcox outcoach Jeff Brom.
Yeah, He's a solid. I think he's a good coach. They needed more winning records to confirm that, but like
sure. But I am not convinced he's a terrible coach. Whereas with Cal, they're going to bring in Tosh Lupoy, and I don't know if he's going to be a great coach or not. Of the jobs that have now been filled, the carousel as it's gone on, what do you make of all of them? I mean, I guess we start with Lane Kiffin and kind of go from there. I mean, look, Lane Kiffin's a good coach. Is he a national championship winning coach? I don't know. I'm way more interested by what Pete Golding is going to be able to do at Ole Miss and whether or not he is a good coach, or if that was kind of the reactive, you're going to break up with us. Well, we've already moved on from Ole Miss.
Well, all right. So these are the kinds of things that I can now say on this show that I probably felt like I shouldn't have said or didn't need to say when we were under a previous umbrella. Pete Golding is kind of like Volatile's underselling Pete Golding. Like the stories that we have on Pete Golding are like they're insane. And I'm not talking about like criminal behavior here. I'm not talking about that. I'm just talking about like personality clashes and intensity, and like the stories I've heard are wild. Now, I think he is the right guy for this playoff run, but this screams RIP to one of my favorite people in the history of college football. But this screams Zach Arnett at Mississippi State 2 years ago. This screams like, and in Oxford, like, let's be honest, Lane Kiffin is technically deceased in Oxford. Let's be clear about that. Like this, that's what this feels like. He doesn't really deserve the job, but like circumstances have presented themselves where he might be the best guy for the job right now. I think they think he is a stability play. And I think by the end of next season, we are going, what is happening in Oxford? So I think maybe I'm wrong about that. I think Silverfield to Arkansas is not a great hire. I think clearly when Memphis fans are all excited about that, that's bad. I think Pete Golding they're going to be looking for something new soon. There's a lot of other moves though. Like I'm really interested in Eric Morris at Oklahoma State. I think that's a really interesting decision by them. I think it's an interesting decision by Morris because he would have had other options too to go maybe bigger, but I think that's a really good job. And to bring that level of like Texas offense to Stillwater, I think is a really smart move by the Pokes. So I really like that hire. As I mentioned, I love Pat Fitzgerald. I think that's a really great hire. Also, everyone's obsessed with Brian Hartline and Matt Patricia, and I'm like, I don't know if I get that yet. Like,
I'm surprised Brian Hartline had to settle for USF though, because I thought he was in the mix for Penn State. He was absolutely in the mix for Kentucky.
He's not ready for those jobs though.
He ends up at USF.
He's not ready for those jobs. I like Tavita Pritchard at Stanford. I think that's sort of just like what you have to do. Bob Chesney will be very high on my list of like coaching hires that I really like. I think he's a really savvy dude.
I have a story for you about Bob Chesney, by the way.
All right, let's hear it.
So I think I could say this. So I know that Virginia Tech, when they fired Brett Pry, that they were looking at, kind of just doing the beginning of their search. And that Bob Chesney was a part of it.
Very high on the list, yeah.
And that Whit Babcock, the athletic director at Virginia Tech, was somewhat interested in Bob Chesney and very intrigued by Bob Chesney. And yet he kind of said at the end of the day, before they even got to Franklin, he was like, yeah, we probably won't go that far down our list to get to Bob Chesney. And obviously they didn't because they got their first choice in James Franklin.
They knew, yeah.
It's kind of crazy that, like Virginia Tech was looking at Bob Chesney like, oh, this could be nice, but he's probably not good enough for us now. And I have to be honest, I think there's probably about 10 of these jobs that are like, you know what? We probably should have hired Bob Chesney as opposed to who we did hire.
Well, I would have hired Bob Chesney at Arkansas over Silverfield. If the nicest thing you can say about Ryan Silverfield and Pete Golding at Ole Miss is that they are like the nicest thing I think you can say about hiring Ryan Silverfield at Arkansas is that he's better than Sam Pittman. Like, I think they upgraded.
And that's it.
But I think that's as far as he's a solid coach. He scouts really well. But like 6 years in the AAC, not one conference championship appearance. You look at Jon Sumrall, who had 2-2, right? Like, Golish took a program in the same conference that was 4-29 and turned him into a winning program pretty quickly at South Florida. I think that's the right job for Hartline, though. I think that's a great place. Like they are talking, South Florida is going to spend, they want to have the most expensive Group of 5 roster next year. And that is a huge deal. So I think it's a great landing spot for Hartline. And if you cannot win at South Florida, when they have the most money of any team in the group of 5 right now, committed at least, or at least verbally. I don't. It's kind of like Heupel recruiting at Central Florida. Like you have to have the best recruiting class if you are UCF in the AAC. Like you should have the best recruiting classes almost every year, and that was the concern about Heupel. With that amount of money at South Florida, Heartline should have the best roster in the conference, outside of maybe Tulane, because Tulane has a ton of money too. I think that's the one relative to G5, I should say. So I'm interested in Heartline because there's so much noise around him and so much excitement around him, but I'm not like it's Ryan Day's offense. You know what I'm saying? Like I don't know. Like I think Will Stein is really interesting. I think it's smart to go offense when you have the defense. Neil Brown, the retread, I think he's experienced, but is North Texas going to get better because you went back to Neil Brown? On this show, I raved about Neil Brown when West Virginia hired him. That didn't work out. There's some financial issues around West Virginia that maybe played a role in that. So you could do a lot worse than Neil Brown. Jim Mora going to Colorado State is really interesting because Mora's
not a good look for UConn.
No, it's not a good look for UConn. But Colorado State's always had this like UNLV level of like, but if we just get the right investment in coach, we'll be a sleeping group of 5 giant kind of deal. And so I think Mora's he's a pretty sound coach. To get UConn to as good as they've been the last few years, that's an impressive job he's done. So
what do you make of the controversy surrounding Nick Saban and College GameDay with the fact that Lane Kiffin, we all knew he was probably going to go either to LSU, Florida, or Ole Miss. And if he went to LSU or he went to Florida, he wasn't going to be able to coach in a playoff because the recruiting, the signing day was yesterday and the transfer portal is going to open and coaching hires. And Nick Saban, a guy who fired Lane Kiffin before the national championship game because Lane Kiffin could not act right as the future coach at FIU while still being the offensive coordinator at Alabama. So Nick Saban is on College GameDay basically preaching to the masses that Lane Kiffin should be able to coach Ole Miss through the playoff. We know they share the same agent, Jimmy Sexton. I think that, if anything, it hurt Saban's credibility on that program to go on the rant he went on, knowing what he did and how he viewed Kiffin at the end of his run at Alabama. I was disappointed in Nick Saban. What do you make of it?
I think that's fair. But tell me, you've worked with a lot of athletes and coaches too in your career, and I have as well. And I guess I just view athletes and coaches. Maybe Herb Street's different in that he's kind of transitioned from like athlete to like broadcaster. He's more of a broadcaster than he is an athlete. But almost every former athlete and coach, and I'm not trying to disparage them here, I just have never looked at any of them as journalists and as reporters. Like there was a local guy here in Nashville that like went off on a bunch of journalists because like he specifically was telling people he was not one of them. Former player, really nice guy, but like I don't look at former athletes and coaches. I just assume they have all these relationships because I've seen them interact. I've been in the LSU facility with Houston Nutt talking to Coach O and Les Miles. Like they know everybody. They all know each other and they all have relationships. And so I guess I just don't like, if you said like, oh, Lane Kiffin and Nick Saban talked and Saban told him he should go to LSU, I'd be like, yeah. Like that's not, but to your point, going on the biggest platformed show on the biggest network that covers this stuff, I think to the casual fan, I think they have a right to be like, wait a second, why didn't you disclose that you talked about this? I think that's where I think the average person who doesn't know like the inside media navel gazing element of all of this that you and I kind of know, I think that person has a right to be upset and say, well, wait a second, I didn't think this feels like you weren't transparent with me in the information you gave me. And so I'm okay with fans being upset about that. I'm just as upset at the national media as sanctimonious as they have been about Lane Kiffin too. Like, oh, he's leaving Oxford burning. I'm like, Oxford's in better shape than it's been ever in the history of its program. Oh, his reputation is destroyed. I'm like, no, he made a tough decision in a tough situation. And that reputation you guys are complaining about and being holier than thou about is the one that got him $13 million at LSU because he continues to win every single place he's been. So I think we are way obsessed with Lane Kiffin because it's Lane Kiffin, and we overreact to him because everything he does we overreact to. And same with Saban.
I disagree.
What is he supposed to say though on the set? He's supposed to say like, "Oh, I told him to go to LSU." Like he can't say that on that's tampering, isn't it, or something? I don't know.
Well, Saban can do whatever way. Who's going to find him? ESPN.
Yeah, I guess that's right.
Here's what I believe, and I'll start with the Saban thing, and then I'll get to the Kiffin thing.
All right.
As far as Saban's concerned, And this drives me crazy with anybody. And this includes myself. I do feel like relationships should be disclosed. That in the, I understand the LSU coach or the Auburn coach and the way that, Auburn is the best school in the country. And then the next day they go to Mississippi State and they say, Mississippi State is the best school in the country.
We signed every single player we wanted. We missed on no players this recruiting week.
Right. I understand that because we already know the bias when you've got the Mississippi State quarter zip on and you're telling us about how Mississippi State's the best. So that doesn't bother me. But intellectual dishonesty does bother me. And it is something that I view as beneath me. And I believe that intellectual dishonesty is beneath Nick Saban. And on 2 separate occasions this year on College GameDay, Nick Saban has, and I like Nick Saban, Nick Saban has flat out lied on College GameDay, in my opinion, to the audience twice. The first was in defense of Bill Belichick at North Carolina. Again, they're friends, former colleagues, talking about how Bill Belichick needs time and Bill Belichick needs to be given an opportunity to build his roster. And again, just totally all in for Belichick when Nick Saban knows that in 2025, that's not how this works in college football anymore.
But it's not like that relationship isn't public information and publicly disclosed. The casual fan may not know the details of their relationship. And that's why I'm sort of like, I think you're lying to a casual who doesn't know better. And I don't mean to be disparaging to casual fans, but most people don't have time to know all this nonsense like we do, apparently. And so I get it, but what is he supposed to like? It's not a lie if he's just like in the bag for Bill Belichick. You just need to know that he's in the bag.
Nick Saban knows Bill Belichick is in over his head at North Carolina and is going to fail. You know that.
He's propagating, but he's doing his friend a solid.
That's what I don't like.
The James, of course.
Take Nick Saban, the coach at Alabama.
Don't listen to it then. Don't watch it.
Did Nick Saban, the coach at Alabama, ever put the interest of Alabama behind anything else? Any of his friendships, any of his relationships, did Nick Saban, you talk about, hey, these guys are friends. Did Nick Saban take it easy on coaches because, well, we're friends?
No.
Okay.
But they have a famous text thread.
When you are on that stage on game day, your job is to give your opinion. That's what they're paying you for, is your opinion. And so for Nick Saban to get up there and act like he thinks Bill Belichick is going to get it figured out at North Carolina is bullcrap. And so that's the first time. And this idea, Nick Saban knows how signing day works. Nick Saban knows how coaching cycles and assistant coaches and recruiting works. He knows Lane Kiffin can't coach through the playoffs. He knows it.
All right. So why is that the case? Just because it's Ole Miss's rival? Like, again, I'm not trying to defend Lane Kiffin. I'm not defending Lane
Kiffin because Kiffin couldn't mind his P's and Q's.
That was years ago. He's a new man, Jared.
Wasn't the head coach.
Stillman. He's a new man.
I'm sure Nick Saban believes that one too.
I guess so. Ultimately, like, your points I think are totally accurate. Like, I agree with your points that like transparency is better, disclosure of relationships is better, but like he's not going to betray a friendship and tell everybody what he said to Lane. That's never going to happen. I think we just had like, I guess I'm being naive on this, where I just assume that they talked. I assume that Nick Saban and Lane Kiffin are talking, and that when Nick Saban,
he was going to call Saban on Friday after the Egg Bowl,
right? So I'm not like not upset about it, but I also am like not. I guess I just assumed that when Nick Saban says something about Bill Belichick, I hear it through the lens of, well, I know they're best friends, or I know that they're peers or colleagues. Like, I guess I do that because I'm in the business. It doesn't mean it's right. It doesn't mean that you're not right, that he should have said like, hey, in all, like, here's what he could have said. Like, hey, in all honesty, I've been communicating with Lane Kiffin throughout this process. And of course, I'm going to keep those conversations private, but I've had those conversations with Lane. And personally, I think Ole Miss should let him coach. Like, he's still making the same point, right?
Sure.
And I think Ole Miss should have figured out a way to let him coach also, but that's my opinion, and I understand why Ole Miss did what they did. I'm not blaming anybody in this other than the NCAA for breaking the calendar, because the NFL does this right where they have like, nope, you can't interview on Zoom until 2 days after the season's over. And that sounds stupid and like structured to like an almost silly way, but it keeps this shit from happening.
I look at it like, again, I don't have the platform Nick Saban has. I don't have the credibility that Nick Saban has. But, I mean, I'm friends with Will Stein, who got the job at Kentucky. Very close with Will Stein. We've known each other for 15 years. And I am excited for Kentucky because I think Will Stein's a good ball coach. And I know this. I know he's a good man. And so I know that he will bring a certain level of professionalism and honesty and all that stuff to Kentucky. And I'm not making any of that up. But I would be lying to the audience if I pretended like I thought that if I got on here and I said, because Will Stein and I are friends, he's going to win a national championship at Kentucky. Right. You mark my words. This is the greatest hire that's ever. Everybody should go commit to Kentucky. I would be lying. I want him to, you know me, I went to Louisville. I don't root for Kentucky, but I would love for Will Stein to win a national championship because he's such a great guy. And he's a good ball coach and he's a good dude. And so I'm rooting for him, but I wouldn't lie to the audience about that. And so when Saban, gets up there and acts holier than thou about how Lane should continue to coach at Ole Miss, and Saban is a part of this process, he needs to disclose that to the audience without saying, what the nature of their conversations are.
So I think this is like another opportunity for because I have a relationship, like we both had a relationship with James Franklin when he was here. And like he did something for my wife's family one time on accident. He didn't even know he was doing it. He went and visited my then girlfriend's, now 10 years married wife, grandfather, who was in the hospital, longtime Vanderbilt season ticket holder. And I always felt that, like, because when he did that, I went up and talked to him after a press conference one time. I said, look, hey, I really appreciate what you did here, man. I know you didn't know you were doing it, but like it was off the record, away from everything else. And he does stuff like that. And I feel like I think when I was covering him locally when he was at Vanderbilt, I felt kind of the need to say some of that stuff occasionally. Mm-hmm. But I also think I'm also torn on that because it shouldn't shade your analysis. To your point, like I'm really close friends with this coach over here, or I really know this guy. I've known Jon Sumrall for a few years now, and not personally, but I've interviewed him and talked to him, and I went and visited spring practice one time with my kids. Like I knew what he was doing at Troy pretty early on, and I know he is an incredibly smart and analytical guy who kind of works this way and that way. It doesn't mean he's going to win a championship at Florida, and I can't sit here and say that. But I feel like I should disclose. I also think that people know that media and reporters have relationships. Otherwise, why do you listen to them? Why do you pay attention to them? And so I do think some of this is like, it's a little navel-gazing here where we're all kind of like, kind of just super into the inside baseball media side of this stuff. I just think that the smart people who've listened to this show for a long, long time, and I know a lot of you out there, I think that when you see a report from Pete Thamel, like, he's got relationships with every one of these coaches.
Sure.
And you know that certain guys have relationships with certain networks. You know that certain networks have certain relationships with certain conferences. Certain agencies have certain relationships with certain reporters. Like, we know all this stuff is happening.
When I am watching Pete Thamel report stuff, it's because that's what I know people want the mass to know, and they go tell Pete Thamel. I get that. Nick Saban is on game day because fans want to hear what Nick Saban thinks.
Okay.
That's why Nick Saban is there. Nick Saban is not there because he's got, relationships with coaches and he's got relationships with people. Want to know what Nick Saban, the Alabama coach, who is no longer the Alabama coach, people want to know what Nick Saban thinks the Indiana defense is going to have to do against Julian Sand on Saturday.
I totally agree. If Urban Meyer's on, because I think this is the other thing, ESPN, this is going to sound like me being a shill for a company that I sort of work for, but like I think people get upset with like ESPN shilling for the SEC, and then nobody turns around and says anything about Fox shilling for the Big Ten. If I saw Urban Meyer openly, because here's what I think is going to happen: Bama is going to lose to Georgia, and I think Saban's going to have to go on game day and make his case for why he thinks Bama deserves to be in. Now, I think you should make that case before the game. Mm-hmm. I think if you believe BYU should be in the playoff, you need to say it today. Not before they lose to Texas Tech or before they win against Texas Tech. You need to say it beforehand. I think Alabama and BYU both should be ranked where they are. Like, I don't think you should move them up or down based on what happens in the championship games, because I think you should base it mostly on what you do in the regular season when you're comparing resumes. So, but if Urban Meyer is shilling for Ohio State to be into the playoff when they're a 2-loss team or a 3-loss team or whatever, I don't really doubt or question where that comes from. Like, I think there's an objective analysis there by Urban Meyer, but also, like, he's the former Ohio State coach. Of course he wants to see Ohio State do well. If Saban's shilling for Alabama, it's like, That may be his honest opinion, but of course he's shilling. And I think I always have a, like, it's not what's the opposite of a tax, like a sale or a reduction. I have an automatic athlete reduction thing that happens in my head. When coaches and players say things about certain things that I know they have a relationship with, I just reduce it by like 20%.
Sure. Joel Klatt during the summer went on these rants about why the college football playoff needed to be 4-4-2-2. And it's like, obviously, and then he did a sit down with Tony Petitti to talk about why it needs to be 4-4-2-2. And it's like, okay, Joel Klatt is the voice of the Big Ten game of the week. Of course, Joel Klatt is going to carry the water for the Big Ten.
I don't have a problem.
I also think that's dishonest because, and maybe I'll never be the number one analyst for the Big Ten game every week.
You could say it now.
I could never do that.
Like, I know that's my issue too.
Never do that. I could never,
Jared,
just get on there and say something that's not true. I couldn't do it.
No, it's about loyalty to your audience. And honestly, I don't think I've ever said this on the air. Like, that is why I was not good at our former employer as it pertained to their number one partner. We had a media contract with a local professional sports team, and I was never going to sell out my relationship with my audience to give them my honest opinion about something in protection or defense of, or because of a meaningful business relationship with.
When did you get in trouble for that?
Just all the time.
I only got in trouble one time for it. It's because I called John Hines bald.
Well, that is kind of silly to do.
Well, he is bald.
But this is why like interviewing play-by-play people is so great in college football for historical stories. Like if you want to interview like Eli Gold for like old Bama stuff, or if you want to go, like, it's so colorful and beautiful and wonderful interviews, but you cannot interview a play-by-play. People know this is like, I think fans know this. When you have a long-time play-by-play man on a radio interview, like, they're not going to give you anything controversial. Like, everybody knows that.
No,
so again,
you're never going to talk to the voice of the Cleveland Browns and him say, I think that Jimmy Haslam's really screwed up everything with the quarterback position. And you're never going to get that. I understand that. But again, he's wearing a Cleveland Browns quarter zip when he's doing that interview.
That's true.
That I'm okay with. What I'm not okay with is somebody, Nick Saban, who's, again, this is my opinion. And my opinion is the opinion that protects my friends.
Is that Nick Saban's voice? It doesn't sound like
Nick
him at all.
Saban is actually more like you have to do the things that you want to do in order for y'all to be successful. You've got to commit every day to telling the truth on College GameDay. Because the first time you get caught doing that, everybody's gonna. That's kind of my. It's more the pacing of Saban that I think I've got.
It's about the pacing for sure. It's got that West Virginia, Michigan, Louisiana, Alabama thing going.
Okay, last thing here. What do you make of conference title weekend now that teams like Alabama and BYU could, in theory, be penalized for losing on conference title weekend when teams that like Notre Dame don't have to play? And what do we make of that?
Well, like Ole Miss, A&M in the SEC, or Oregon in the Big Ten, like, not good enough technically to be the best two teams in their conferences, so they don't have to play an extra game. They're okay though because they only lost one time. Like, that's my issue here. Is I think you should. Alabama and BYU are obviously the top two candidates for this year, which the committee showed us last year that SMU. Do I think SMU was better than Alabama last year? Probably not. Would I have picked Alabama to win that game head-to-head? Probably. But SMU, one-loss team in the rankings before the loss in the ACC championship game to Clemson by a close margin. Now, if Texas Tech beats BYU by 59 points or something, the old 59-0 Wisconsin-Ohio State type deal, if that happens, then maybe we can talk about BYU. But even then, I don't think that's fair. I think if you think BYU is one of the 12 best teams right now, which they do, albeit not good enough to get in because they need 10, I think you have to leave them where they are, loss or win. And I would say the same thing about Bama, the same thing about BYU. I think you've got to leave them where they are. Now, if BYU wins, Jared, I think the committee's job gets real easy because they put BYU has to be in. They're going to leave Texas Tech in. Then they can leave Notre Dame and Miami out altogether, and they don't have to answer any questions about Miami and Notre Dame. I think that's actually what they would want to see happen because they don't have to explain that. I do believe Notre Dame is better than Miami. I know they played head-to-head. I know they played schedules. I just think Notre Dame's better, and I know that that's harder to explain. than the other way around. I think a lot of teams are getting screwed. It's just unfortunate that we're going to have a lot of equally balanced and matched up teams from, I think, slot 8 at Oklahoma down to, and probably even Ole Miss, honestly, down to like, Texas, USC, Vanderbilt.
I think before we get to USC is where it stops.
That's fair. That's totally fair. I think
so. Right
I think
now,
they're all about the
Vanderbilt
same. Utah's really good.
At 14 is probably, look, I've said this time and time again. When we had the 14 playoff, the 5th team, everybody said that's not fair. When we have a 12-team playoff, the 13th team, everyone's going to say that's not fair. You do have a way to play your way into the playoff, even though that's technically not fair. Life is not fair. I do think that Tony Petitti, though, is getting a gift here, because this Big Ten championship game, it should have a lot of juice to it, because it's number 1 versus number 2. They're undefeated. I want to see if Indiana can match up with Ohio State. And yet, don't you think both coaches need to keep things in the bag, because they may see each other again?
And injuries, too.
What's that going to do for the Big Ten championship game? And what's that going to do for the TV ratings? And Tony Petitti is desperate to get a 3rd and 4th place game going on. And I think that's the way to do this, is to say, look, the Big Ten championship game, yes, it drew 11 million viewers, but it didn't have any juice to it. And nobody's all that excited for a 1 versus 2 the way they should be. And the coaches have to protect themselves. But if we get the 3 versus 6 and the 4 versus 5, that's going to make this a watchable weekend. And for the entire summer, everybody said that that's foolish, including me. Now, I just don't like it because I think he's doing it to protect the CBS and NBC contracts. But I will now say, hey, I much rather have that than just Notre Dame's better. And that's what we're doing now.
The games would be so much more meaningful if you had 2 play-in games, basically 3, 6, and 4. The problem is to get to that, you need the participation trophy structure of the playoff that nobody wants, which is the 4-bit automatic bids. And nobody wants the 4 automatic bid garbage. So I was always looking at it like, if they do this nonsense that I hate, what is the silver lining? Well, the silver lining is that 3, 6, and 4, 5 matchups would be awesome theater. They would be great theater. Look, what's interesting is I think the ratings for Indiana Ohio State are still going to be awesome. I think the ratings are going to be really high because it's 2 huge Midwest alumni bases, 1 versus 2. Winner gets to be number 1 and stay undefeated. Even though you and I both know, and I think most people listening to this show know that, honestly, just like I said with Bama and just like I said with BYU, you shouldn't fall out of the top 4 if you lose because you were so good that you played an extra game against number 2. Mm-hmm. Which is the argument for Texas to be in the playoff, which I don't necessarily agree with, but this is where we are. And so, again, to your point, my mom always told me the same thing. Life ain't fair. Diego Pavia is tweeting the president for an expansion of the playoff, which is unbelievable.
So it's a creative thinking. I'll give him that.
And he's good at that stuff. A hell of a week by Vanderbilt, by the way. Unbelievable win. Best win maybe in school history, finishing up the best season.
Actually, it wasn't that good of a win because the committee says that now Tennessee's not any good because Vanderbilt beat them.
Well, fine. I just mean in their history, to win that game the way they did against their in-state rival on the road, maybe winning a Heisman Trophy for their quarterback, and almost getting into the playoff, finishing with 10 wins. It's a historic win for Vanderbilt's fans. And then Clark Lee gets the extension. They flip the number 1 quarterback in the nation. Pavia is going to go to New York for the Heisman. And, oh, by the way, now they're like, hey, anybody want to play this weekend?
Yeah.
We'll be ready to go.
I think
it sucks they're getting left out, but it is what it is.
It is disappointing. And it's like Rick Neuheisel said to me this week. He said, if they were wearing Tennessee orange or if they were wearing Texas orange with their resume and record, they'd be
Stop it. You keep saying that. And
that's what, Coach Neuheisel said it, not me.
BYU's I
did say it too.
Coach Neuheisel also needs to disclose a lot of his relationships if that's the case. BYU cannot complain about brand if BYU's ahead of you. You can't complain about brand bias. Miami is like a huge brand. I think is USC right behind them. Is that right?
I think so.
In the rankings, you're ahead of USC. USC is much better. ESPN and or TV partners would much rather have USC in than Vanderbilt in.
So. The BCS computers say Vanderbilt's the 12th best team in the country,
and that would not make it in, unfortunately, with these rankings. So,
but
I don't disagree with that.
Is 11th. And I do think the way the BCS computers operate, if BYU were to lose the game to Texas Tech, they would probably fall behind Vanderbilt.
I mean, based on my theory of the case, I don't know. Do you agree that they should fall if they lose? Should Bama fall if they lose? Should BYU fall if they lose? I think they should stay where they are. 9 and 11.
I don't think they should. I just don't think it's, again, not to say what's fair because life ain't fair, but I don't think it's fair to have Alabama play Georgia, lose to Georgia, and then say, oh, well, they've got 3 losses, they're out.
Especially when you already beat them on the road in their building.
I mean, at that point, you're going to have teams that will decline bids to the conference championship game.
Which you can't have. I think they should stay at 9-11 outside of like a 70-0 loss, right? Like I think you should stay at 9-11. The problem is, or the good news, I don't know which one you look at it as, 11-12 are not getting in. Like that ain't happening. It's going to be Tulane, North Texas, or hopefully Virginia. No disrespect to Duke, but like hopefully it's Virginia. Although it'd be really fun to have James Madison and another G5 in as well. That'd be cool. But like they're not 11-12 aren't getting in. You got to get to 10. So the question is, can you jump Notre Dame? That's the only question. Make
the prediction now. Who is going to be Penn State's next coach?
I can't believe I'm saying Brian Daboll, but I think it's Brian Daboll.
Does he have the temperament?
Actually, I think he does. Actually.
Really?
Yeah. He may not be.
The vibe when I watched the Giants Hard Knocks on HBO, that off-season Hard Knocks, which was actually very enjoyable. I don't really like Hard Knocks, but this was more about the front office and the decisions they made than it was about the players.
It's a Saquon Barkley viral meme, right? Like,
yeah. I just got the sense watching that Brian Daboll was too lazy.
Ooh, I don't know about that. It's hard to be an NFL head coach and be lazy. And he got to the playoffs with Daniel Jones, so I don't know. It just feels very Bill O'Brien, and maybe Penn State fans probably don't want that.
There may be something that. Braden, great show today, buddy.
Yeah, man. Always a pleasure, dude. I hope you guys stay tuned to this, by the way. I still don't know exactly what's going to happen, but we're going to pop on here periodically with some cool voices, and Jared's going to be a part of that. And so just stay tuned. We'll have some coverage throughout the course of the playoffs and everything. So fun to talk college ball with you, man. We haven't ever done that before, so it's good to do it with you.
Always fun. Take care. Again, this is the 440 Sports College Football Show.